This photograph was taken by Nate Saint, an American missionary. It's an Indian village in Ecuador. Shortly after it was taken, the photographer and 4 other missionaries were massacred by a mysterious tribe, the Aucas, sullen and treacherous spearmen who derive prestige from multiple murder. Little is known of the Auca Indians. The scientific journals of anthropology contain scant information. They're a tribe deeply isolated in the jungles of Ecuador. The missionaries had flown reconnaissance flights over the Auca village for some months, lowering baskets of gifts in an effort to make friends. At last, they made a landing on a sand beach of the Curaray River, where they made face-to-face contact with 3 Aucas, 2 women, and a man. They were greeted cordially and took several pictures of the Indians. They indicated that they were anxious to meet others of the tribe, but instead of leading them there, the Aucas eventually drifted back into the jungle. 2 days later, in a radio report to their base camp, the missionaries were still confident of meeting others of the tribe. "We are hoping for visitors at about 2:30, one of them said. "I'll call you again at 4:35. That call was never made. Later, recovery of one of their cameras told a tragic story. 2 more photographs had been taken before the men were cut down. The blotch on the 3rd film was caused by water damage to the emulsion. Close by where the camera was found, the rescue team came upon the body. Tragedy came on January 8th. Front pages of the newspapers carried the details. Life magazine devoted 10 full pages to the story. The world looked, read, and was stunned. In an effort to throw light on these wild Stone Age men, we've interviewed a man who has penetrated the South American jungle and has met one of the most notorious of the unpacified tribes. He's Dr. Edward Weir of the American Museum of Natural History. Dr. Weir, when were you last among the wild tribes of South America?
Well, Charles, I reached the country of the Xavantes in May of 1953. The Xavantes are not neighbors of the Aucas, but they're similar to them in their primitiveness and their hostility. This event of the missionaries being killed is, of course, very tragic, but it's nothing new in the history of the Amazon. My own expedition into the geographical center of South America was made with good preparation, but I must say that when I met these Xavantes, I had never felt so uneasy in the presence of a group of primitive people. I kept feeling that anything might happen. I want you to look at their faces closely. Can you see what it is that gives them such a grim and ominous look? I couldn't tell myself at first, close to them, and then I noticed they have no eyebrows. Apparently they pluck them. The government of Brazil has tried to pacify these Xavantes. They leave presents on the trail and drop them from planes, but often as not, the Xavantes clubbed the presents or burned them, either in fear, superstitious fear, or as defiance of the friendly gesture. And if planes go too close to them, the Xavantes are known to shoot arrows and throw their clubs at them. So far as I know, these are the only motion pictures that show a first meeting like this. And events that followed after my journey proved that a certain amount of caution was certainly wise, because less than a month after I left the Kuluani River, a group of 55 Xavantes were encountered by 4 missionaries and 20 Brazilian explorers. And for the next 2 days, on 2 or 3 occasions, the travelers were held under arrow fire for 2 hours at a time. How they escaped, I don't know. It was an almost miraculous thing. And more recently than that, the Xavantes have killed 3 missionaries. The government can't restrain this. Most of these primitive people have a strong code of an eye for an eye. And if they were to, the government were to exert punitive measures, it would only begin an endless cycle of bloodshed and killing. Actually, they received me in a friendly fashion, but there's no assurance that the same would be the case when another traveler goes among them, as has been demonstrated since by the missionaries and other explorers who've been there.
What sort of man is it who derives pleasure from killing? With us today is Dr. Harry Chopik of the scientific staff of the American Museum of Natural History. Dr. Chopik, can you supply some of the background to this tragedy?
Well, Charles, I've been among several tribes in the Montaña, and when I first heard about the news, I was somewhat confused about this reference to the Aucas, because actually, you know, there may not even be any such tribe. In one sense, the word Auca, which is a native term, just means a pagan Indian as opposed to a Christian Indian. And the situation's even more complicated than that, because the term formerly applied to a small sub-tribe that we had thought was extinct. And to be perfectly honest, we don't know who the Aucas are or what they're like, and all we know about them is what we can draw by inference from what we know about the groups that surround them. But I think it's safe to say that the Aucas have not seen any white people, or hadn't until they saw the missionaries, for the last 50 or 100 years, and they'd certainly never seen an airplane on the ground.
Well, now, were the tribes which you visited as treacherous as the Aucas?
Oh, no. The Chamas, for example, are pretty much subdued today. The thing is that the approach to any of these people is very difficult and delicate, and you have to go in on their terms. You can't superimpose your terms for them.
Well, now, since these Indians are really the aboriginal inhabitants of the country, how do you account for the tribal differences between them?
Well, the tribes on the main rivers have been in contact with whites for some time. And of course, there have been missionaries in and out of these jungles for 4 centuries, and they brought in various European customs and ideas. And among the Christian villages, where the missionaries have collected the Indians in villages, why the missionary exerts more or less continuous pressure on them. And then in addition, why the governments of these South American countries have made their attempts to pacify the Indians.
You mentioned the Chamas, Dr. Chopik, as peaceful people. How do they live? What are they like? These tribes live on the main stream and the tributaries of the Ucayali River in eastern Peru.
Well, the Chamas are master bowmen, and they make special arrows designed for shooting certain specified game. The macaw is a bird that they value for its plumage, so that the arrow is devised to minimize damage to the feathers. You'll notice that that arrow is blunted. Now, the war club that was previously used in mass attack by the Chamas is now almost used exclusively in personal duels. It's made of a hard wood called chontapam, and the edges are ground to knife-like sharpness. But one of the things that hasn't changed is this pottery, which is practically as delicate as English porcelain. Now these trousers, I think, are an interesting example of acculturation. The material was brought in by the white man. Actually, it's a pair of blue jeans, but it's decorated in the native style, resulting in this curious hybrid costume.
Let's enter a Chama village and see what the people are like today.
The villages along the main stream of the river are accessible today, but in the past these people were as savage as the tribes of the interior. The influence of the missionaries is evident in the blouses worn by these women. The outside world is even apparent in the traditional nose ring, which is made of a hammered silver coin today. But some of the old crafts are still preserved. This woman is weaving on a native loom with native cotton. The design on the fabric is being painted as in the old days with native dyes, but you'll notice Christian crosses are mixed into the pattern. Tree. Curare, the poison, is made by only a few tribes who have a virtual monopoly, and then it's traded to the other Indians. The Indians never used a blowgun in warfare, maintaining that it would offend the spirits. Actually, the weapon's too deadly, and by some silent understanding, it's never used in battle. Although the Chamas are largely converted and pacified, they still maintain some of their pagan traditions, such as this puberty ceremony. The repressions caused by the encroachment of the white man sometimes break down when they're drunk and come through. On festive occasions like this, when they consume a great deal of their native liquor that they brew from manioc. This man's ear was bitten off in a personal feud. As the beer takes effect, the celebration becomes more disorganized and the dancing less controlled. Two men have forgotten the teachings of their white friends, and in a surge of the old savage spirit, they fall on each other with their war clubs. It's a personal matter, and they'll settle it their own way. The women will try to stop them, to prevent them from using the clubs. But tradition decrees that blood must be taken. And it is.
If that's a pacified people, Dr. Chopik, what are the warlike tribes like?
Well, I can give you an example. On our last expedition, we heard some Kashibo Indians in the jungle. I'm happy to say we didn't see them, but we heard them, and the Chama boatmen were afraid to go any farther because just a couple of days earlier, the Kashibos had come into their settlement and killed several of the men and carried off the women and children.
Well, now, are these people any more savage toward the white man than they are toward their own kind?
Well, if they are, the rubber boom that took place at the turn of the last century is largely to blame. because when the rubber barons found out that the trees of the montaña, the rubber trees, had important latex, they sent in ruthless men who tried to enslave the Indians. And when the Indians refused to work as slave laborers, they doused them with gasoline and set fire to them just to make examples in front of the other Indians.
And the white man today is paying for the brutalities of the rubber boom.
Well, he's even paying for the brutalities of the conquistadores, because in the 16th century, the territory of the Jivaro Indians was very rich in gold, and mining towns grew up here and there. And when the Jivaros became frightened of white encroachment, about 20,000 of them banded together, and they went to one town of a population of 18,000 people and massacred the entire population. They captured the greedy Spanish governor and they staked him out on the ground, and then they poured molten gold down his throat.
Well, it sounds to me as though these tribes haven't changed very much in the last 400 years.
Well, that's certainly true of some of the Jivaros. Ever since that governor that I spoke of, they've remained one of the most savage and violent tribes in the montaña, and they resist white encroachment or European encroachment with an arrogance. They're just not having it. Now, the Jivaros are the nearest relatives or neighbors of the Aucas geographically, and they seem to share the same basic attitude towards the white man.
Both the Jivaro and the Aucas inhabit the jungle-covered hills to the east of the Andes in Ecuador.
The chief war weapon of the Jivaro is the spear, and the warrior also carries a shield. Now, he's fond of personal adornment, and he wears a crown of toucan feathers decorated with iridescent beetle wings. But the Jivaro go most Amazonian tribes one better. Instead of just taking heads, they've developed the art of shrinking them.
Here's a man in the process of shrinking one. Let's join him on his next raid and see what happens.
Like other tribes of the montaña, the Jivaro lives in the jungles along the headwaters of the upper Amazon River. His life is spent in an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust. He never knows when a neighbor may come shouting through the jungle to kill him. And so each family lives in an isolated hut, miles away from any other Jivaro, and surrounded by a complex defense work of traps hidden on the floor of the jungle. Indoctrination in the code of blood feuding and killing begins early, when the boys are 5 years old. While this warrior prepares his poisoned blowgun darts used for hunting small game, he tells the boys of their relatives who've been killed in wars or murdered by sorcery. He instills the lust for revenge, and when a boy is 7, he joins the men of the family on raids against the hated enemy. Has been killed by the enemy. A raid is planned. The relatives are summoned by the drone. Death and violence are synonymous to the Jivaro. One is caused by the other in an endless cycle. And then when the warriors have gathered, the medicine man takes a strong drug which produces hallucinations, visions that tell him who's responsible for the death of his tribesmen. They also tell him how and when to attack the enemy, and he's seen it all in the vision. The tribe across the river's done the killing. He exhorts the warriors to vengeance. He tells them that the spirits demand blood and enemy heads. A war party chief of great experience is selected to lead the attack, and war songs are sung in which threats and insults are hurled against the enemy. And all the wrongs suffered by the relatives in the dim past are remembered with fierce bitterness. Courage and bravado rise to a frenzy as they charge themselves with hatred. Tomorrow there'll be blood. Tomorrow there'll be enemy heads. But in the jungle, the party moves silently, and each warrior steps carefully in the footprints of the man ahead of him in order to avoid traps and deadfalls. The river is the boundary of the enemy tribe, and the danger increases on the other side of it. A sentry posted by the enemy has seen the attacking party. To halt them as long as possible, he sets a trap with bamboo knives attached to a catapult branch of a tree. Once across the river, even more caution is necessary. They know the jungle is trapped, but the attackers don't know where or when the traps will be sprung. Scouts are sent forward by the war chief to reconnoiter the trail. They go silently and watchfully on the path that leads to the enemy's house. But the spring branch of bamboo knives is well concealed. The enemy's killed one of the raiding warriors, but he knows that the attacking force won't be stopped. This death will only serve to deepen their murderous hatred in their hearts, and they'll lay siege to the house of their enemy, and they'll kill the murderer and take his head, and then they'll seek out his relatives. They'll leave no one alive. They'll even kill the dogs and burn the houses in order to discourage the spirits of the dead. The heads have been taken. The warriors march back a distance from the scene of their revenge, and here they make a temporary camp. Here the trophy heads are prepared. The process takes about 20 hours. Towards the end of this time, a messenger will be sent back to the people of the tribe to report the victory, and all the women will prepare a celebration. Shrinking the head is as much a part of revenge as the actual deed of taking it. The lips are pierced in several places in order that they may be sewn together with heavy thread. Hot sand is prepared with which to fill the head and shrink it. When the lips have been properly sewn and averted, the head is dipped into an astringent to set the hair and further to shrink the head. Smoke completes the shrinking and turns the head black. Now the warrior has visible proof that the murder has been avenged. Announces the return of the victors. The warrior prepares for the ritual celebration. He wears his finest ornaments. An important part of the ritual lies ahead. He must deride the head and spit at it and insult it with wild shouts to complete the obligations to the spirits of his ancestors. The ceremony of the dance and the song must be followed strictly in order that the magical powers of the enemy head may be turned to the advantage of the warrior and his people. Unless these rites are performed, the head might become a great source of evil to the tribe. The magic in the head must be exorcised. The ceremony is ended. The dead are avenged. The tribe is honored, and the spirits of the relatives are peaceful.
Dr. Chopik, it's difficult for the civilized man to assimilate such ghastly methods. I would think that if this continues, this killing continues, that the Jivaros would fight themselves right out of existence.
Well, Charles, the Jivaro code may seem pretty grim to us, and I don't mean to condone massacre and headhunting, but don't you think our methods might appear to be pretty savage to the Jivaro? Now, they're ruled by vengeance and blood feud on a private level, but in our atom bomb society, we can kill more human beings in 1 minute with a single bomb than all the Jivaros together could kill in years. And we don't even have the somewhat understandable emotion of personal revenge to motivate us.
You make an interesting point. Thank you, Dr. Chopik, for showing us something of how our violent neighbors to the south live as our own ancestors must have lived some 20,000 years ago. About 3 days ago, Dr. Edward Weir boarded a plane for Point South. And before he left, we asked him this question. Dr. Weir, in the light of these latest developments, is this field trip absolutely necessary?
Yes, Charles, this kind of work is necessary if this kind of science is to progress. Actually, the journey I'm leaving on ought to take me through relatively safe country, but this work among the wild tribes is what's called tough anthropology, and if we're to learn about these very primitive people, really modern Stone Age people, before they change under the influence of civilization, we have to do it soon. And it's the job of anthropologists to go and study and observe and record information among people, no matter who they are or where they are.
Still photographs by permission of Magnum Photos. Music from the Library of Ethnic Folkway Records. Visit the American Museum of Natural History and have your own adventure. It's open every day and there's never an admission charge. Or let the museum come to you through a subscription to Natural History Magazine. To become a museum member and receive the magazine, just send $5 to the American Museum of Natural History, New York 24, New York.